Didn't dig school, I know that. Oh, I liked it all right, but I had to get out and earn a little bread. I had to get out and earn a living. Oh, what do I remember most about my childhood? Peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, if you wanted to. That's great.
Steve McQueen wasn't just a movie star. He was a mystery that only got bigger after his death. While the world remembers the cool stars, the fast cars, and the iconic roles, few know the real story. A secret empire built in silence, hidden vaults, legal battles, and a fortune that didn't just survive, it exploded. What if the most valuable part of McQueen's legacy is something the world hasn't even seen yet?
Well, it's a little difficult. I can't use a footrest. We've had to cut part of it off because I'm 5 1/8 inches across the bottom of my foot, and we put some sandpaper on the bottom, taped it on so I keep it on the clay.
Steve McQueen's name is often linked to fast cars, classic films, and a cool, rebellious image. But before all that, long before Hollywood or any headlines, his life was defined by instability and survival. He wasn't born into luxury or even stability. He came from a fractured home with more hardship than support. His father left before Steve could form memories. His stepfather was violent. His mother, overwhelmed and unstable, left him behind several times. By the time he was a teenager, McQueen had been passed from home to home and found himself living at the Boys Republic, a reform school in Chino, California. It wasn't the kind of place that nurtured dreams. It was a place where kids were sent to be forgotten or straightened out. In that environment, McQueen learned to rely on himself and no one else. He became independent, defensive, and quietly angry. It was also where he began to understand how to push back, how to carve out some kind of control in a world that rarely offered him any. These early years shaped McQueen in ways that never left him. He grew up distrustful of authority, wary of kindness, and careful with emotions. That self-protective mindset followed him into every part of his adult life. What some saw as attitude or arrogance was, at its root, a survival tactic. And in time, it became his brand. After Boys Republic, McQueen didn't follow a straight line into acting. He joined the US Marine Corps in his late teens. Even there, in a highly structured and rule-bound environment, he stood out for the wrong reasons. He had multiple clashes with superiors and spent more than a few days in the brig. But he completed his service, and that experience added another layer to his character, a kind of toughness and defiance that would later bleed into his film roles. When McQueen eventually found his way to acting, it wasn't through some carefully managed route. He didn't walk in as a golden boy or a Hollywood insider. He earned small roles and studied acting with notable coaches, including Sanford Meisner and Lee Strasberg. Slowly, he began landing TV parts and stage roles, and he made a name for himself as someone with real presence, even if he wasn't yet a star. McQueen's breakout came with the TV series Wanted, Dead or Alive, where he played bounty hunter Josh Randall. The show ran from 1958 to 1961 and gave him a platform to showcase his quiet charisma. He didn't need big monologues or flashy scenes. Audiences noticed how much he could say with just a look. It was a skill that would later define some of his most iconic performances. By the early 1960s, Steve McQueen was making waves in Hollywood, but he didn't play the game the way others did. He was known for being difficult on set, showing up late, arguing with directors, or walking off without explanation. Yet, the public didn't seem to care. His screen presence was magnetic, and he delivered box office results. Studios tolerated his unpredictability because he filled seats. One of McQueen's major breakthroughs came with The Great Escape in 1963. The film was a World War II drama, and though McQueen didn't have the most lines, he had the most memorable scenes, especially the motorcycle chase, which became one of the most famous stunts in cinema history. While a professional stuntman performed the action star, the scene still cemented McQueen as the action star of his generation. His character didn't talk much, but his silences were powerful, and his expressions told the story. McQueen followed that success with a string of hits, including The Sand Pebbles, for which he received an Academy Award nomination, and later Bullitt, released in 1968. In Bullitt, McQueen played a San Francisco police lieutenant, and the film's car chase scene through the city's steep streets became a defining moment, not just in his career but in film history. McQueen performed most of the driving himself, pushing his Ford Mustang to its limits. That car, the Highland Green Mustang Fastback, would later become one of the most recognizable vehicles in cinema. Years after the film's release, it was auctioned for over $3,700,000, a testament to how closely it was tied to his legacy. McQueen's appeal was never just about the roles he played, it was the way he played them. He didn't seem like he was pretending. He looked like someone who had lived those experiences, who didn't need to fake toughness or fear. In reality, he brought his own lived experiences into each performance, which gave his characters a gritty authenticity. That honesty, paired with his striking looks, understated style, and refusal to conform, made him a symbol of a new kind of masculinity. He wasn't polished or overly composed, he was real. Despite his fame, McQueen avoided the celebrity lifestyle. He rarely attended Hollywood parties, dressed casually at red carpet events, and kept interviews short. He preferred riding motorcycles in the desert or spending time at his secluded properties. This made him even more intriguing to fans and journalists alike. The less he revealed, the more people wanted to know. Mystery became part of his brand. As his career grew, so did his understanding of his own value. By the late 1960s, McQueen had enough leverage to negotiate new kinds of deals. He began demanding upfront fees and profit participation, unusual for actors at the time. For the Thomas Crown affair, he negotiated a fee of $750,000, 0 cents, a huge sum then. And for the Towering Inferno, he secured a back-end deal that earned him over $12 million, 0 cents. These deals showed not just financial acumen, but a broader awareness of how to use his popularity as a bargaining chip. McQueen also controlled his image on set. He often asked for input on wardrobe, lighting, and camera angles. Directors found this frustrating, but he was thinking ahead, crafting how he would appear on screen, how the public would remember him. What seemed like vanity to some was, in hindsight, a calculated move. At his peak, McQueen was one of the highest-paid actors in the world, yet he remained an outsider in many ways. He didn't align himself with the Hollywood elite, didn't engage in politics or public activism, and didn't cultivate a polished public persona. He was careful, guarded, and constantly navigating the tension between fame and privacy. This resistance to Hollywood norms gave McQueen a kind of timeless appeal. He represented something different, someone who refused to be shaped by the system. That tension between celebrity and rebellion, visibility and secrecy, was part of what made him so compelling. He could be in the spotlight and remain elusive at the same time. What many didn't realize was that behind the scenes, McQueen was also laying the groundwork for something much larger than a film career. He was quietly building a personal empire, one that extended beyond the screen and into business, branding, and long-term value. But that part of his story wouldn't become fully visible until much later. At this point in his life, McQueen wasn't just a successful actor. He was a cultural icon, but he was also a man shaped by hardship, driven by a need for control, and guided by instincts that had been honed long before anyone had heard his name. And that foundation of resilience, strategy, and self-reliance would be the blueprint for everything that followed. Steve McQueen's fame in the 1960s and 70s wasn't just the result of charisma or good fortune. While most of the public saw a Hollywood rebel with a passion for speed and action, McQueen was quietly building something much more permanent. Behind his low-profile lifestyle and anti-Hollywood persona, he was making careful moves that would later reveal a private empire unlike anything his fans imagined. On the surface, McQueen seemed uninterested in wealth. He rarely flaunted it, avoided flashy parties, and lived far from the spotlight. But privately, he was investing in physical assets, items he believed would hold long-term value: cars, motorcycles, watches, real estate, and even branded partnerships became central to the quiet purchases became central. These weren't random purchases. McQueen had a vision, one built on personal passion and business instinct. By the early 1970s, McQueen had one of the largest private motorcycle collections in the United States. It wasn't for show. He rarely talked about it, never invited the press to see it, and didn't open it to the public. The collection included more than 130 rare and vintage bikes, carefully selected for their history, engineering, or racing legacy. British, German, and American models filled his garages. Triumphs, Indians, Husqvarnas, Bruffs Superiors, and more. Some were one-of-a-kind custom builds made specifically for him. These motorcycles were stored in secure, climate-controlled spaces on remote properties. He didn't need recognition for owning them. He valued them for what they were: durable, tangible objects that would appreciate over time. At a point when many actors were spending recklessly or chasing publicity, McQueen was collecting value. He wasn't investing in stocks or bonds. He was investing in machines, the kind he understood and loved. Cars played a similar role in his life and financial planning. McQueen's taste in vehicles leaned toward the rare and historic. Among his collection were high-end models that later became legends in their own right: a 1963 Ferrari 250 GT Lusso, a Jaguar XKSS, the original green Ford Mustang GT 390 from Bullitt, and a Porsche 917K were just a few of the pieces he owned. Many of these cars had direct ties to his film work or personal racing history, adding not only emotional weight but market value. The Porsche 917K alone, a model associated with his film Le Mans, sold years later at auction for over $14 million, 0 cents. The Mustang from Bullitt, once thought lost, re-emerged and was sold for more than $3,700,000, 0 cents. These vehicles weren't just collectibles. They were future-proof assets, objects that would grow more valuable with time, especially as his image became iconic. McQueen didn't collect cars and bikes just to fill space. Each one had meaning, either personally or historically. Many had racing backgrounds, special modifications, or emotional connections. They were chosen with intent, not impulse. He wasn't interested in reselling them quickly or showing them off. He kept them private, protected, and ready for a time when their value would speak for itself. His careful investment strategy extended beyond machines. He also acquired rare watches, many of which he wore on screen or in races. One of his Rolex Submariners, known for its rugged design, eventually sold for over $234,000, 0 cents. Another timepiece, the Hoya Monaco worn during Le Mans, sold for $2,200,000, 0 cents. These watches, like his vehicles, were items he used, appreciated, and then stored away, not for fame, but because he understood their potential. 2006, long after McQueen's death, one of the most remarkable discoveries tied to his estate took place. In a dusty barn in New Mexico, long forgotten and unopened, estate managers uncovered a hidden trove of items. Dozens of motorcycles, stacks of racing gear, original leather jackets, film scripts, and other memorabilia were sitting in silence. Some pieces still had his name stitched into them. The collection, undisturbed for decades, was estimated to be worth over $30 million, 0 cents. That discovery shifted how people viewed McQueen's wealth. Up until then, most believed his estate had been modest or even depleted due to medical expenses and lawsuits. But the contents of that barn told a very different story. They revealed a deeper, more strategic form of wealth, one built on rare physical goods with cultural and historical significance. The barn find also highlighted how much of McQueen's estate had gone undocumented. His planning was private, often informal. Many items weren't catalogued until long after his passing. Even his legal team hadn't grasped the full extent of what he owned. Some items were recovered from private sales or auction houses years later, only after being identified as part of his original collection. In addition to motorcycles, cars, and watches, McQueen also invested in real estate, but not in the typical Hollywood fashion. He didn't own flashy Beverly Hills mansions or penthouse apartments in the city. Instead, he bought remote properties, many of them designed to keep him away from the public eye. Ranches in California, Mexico, and Idaho gave him space to store his machines and live quietly. These locations weren't only retreats, they were extensions of his strategy: low profile, high value, and secure. One of McQueen's most forward-thinking moves involved licensing and brand partnerships. At a time when that concept was still in its early stages, he partnered with Honda to promote their motorcycles in the United States, becoming one of the faces of their marketing campaigns. It wasn't just about appearing in ads. He negotiated for a financial stake in the campaign's success. As sales rose, his earnings grew. That partnership continued to pay off well after he stepped away from public life. He used a similar approach with off-road racing. Though he genuinely loved the sport, his participation served a dual purpose. His presence helped sell motorcycles, gear, and apparel, many of which he had financial connections to. Companies paid simply to associate their products with his image. He didn't need to speak or promote them directly. Just being seen in them was enough. Even after his death in 1980, the earnings from these deals continued. Licensing agreements tied to his name, face, and style were already in place. And as vintage marketing gained popularity, in the 1990s and beyond, his estate began to see renewed income from previously minor deals. What McQueen had set in motion during his life turned into a licensing machine years later. Despite public assumptions that McQueen nearly broke, the reality was far different. While some legal costs and medical treatments had drained short-term cash reserves, the bulk of his wealth had been stored in physical assets, property, and brand equity. These weren't liquid, and they didn't show up in early valuations. But they existed, and they were growing. Today, McQueen's estate earns millions each year from licensing alone. His image is used in fashion, automotive campaigns, watches, and documentaries. His car and bike collections continue to appreciate, and his personal items regularly set records at auction. But none of this happened by chance. It was the result of careful, private planning, much of it far ahead of its time. Steve McQueen never talked publicly about building a business empire. He didn't give interviews about financial planning or future value. But his actions, choices, and preferences formed the backbone of a legacy that continues to grow. He didn't just collect cool things, he collected assets. And he did it with precision. His hidden empire, built in garages, barns, and remote properties, is now recognized as one of the most valuable celebrity estates in Hollywood history. And for those who knew him, that quiet success makes perfect sense. McQueen was never interested in being loud. He just wanted to be in control. And in that silence, he built something far louder than words. When Steve McQueen passed away in November 1980, it was the end of an era for Hollywood's golden rebel. But his death marked the beginning of a new chapter, one filled with legal complexity, unresolved family tensions, and a long process of unraveling the true scale of his estate. While the world mourned the loss of a cultural icon, those closest to McQueen began a very different journey, one that involved discovering what he truly left behind and who had a right to claim it. McQueen died in Juarez, Mexico, following an unconventional and secretive surgery. He had been diagnosed with mesothelioma, a rare and aggressive cancer linked to asbestos exposure. Instead of seeking treatment through traditional US medical systems, McQueen flew to Mexico in search of an alternative therapy called laetrile, a controversial and banned substance derived from apricot pits. Despite the high risks, he underwent surgery at a small clinic. He didn't survive the night. Back in the United States, early media reports suggested that McQueen died virtually penniless. The narrative was that legal costs, medical expenses, and a lavish lifestyle had drained his finances. Headlines painted a picture of a fallen star who had burned through his wealth, but those stories were misleading. What McQueen left behind was far from simple and far more valuable than initial figures suggested. At the time of his death, his estate was publicly valued at around $2 million. However, this figure only accounted for immediate liquid assets, bank accounts, a few known properties, and more obvious holdings. What it didn't include were the dozens of motorcycles, the vintage cars, the rare watches, the licensing rights, and the brand equity attached to his image. Many of these assets weren't documented or appraised until years later. McQueen had written his will in January 1979, less than 2 years before his death. In it, he named his 2 children, Chad and Terry, as the primary heirs. His ex-wife, Neil Adams, was left out entirely. Barbara Minty, who was his partner at the time and whom he reportedly intended to marry, was granted a share of personal belongings, but not a significant financial portion. That surprised many people close to him, as their relationship had grown more serious in his final years. One clause in the will sparked particular controversy. McQueen had included a legal statement that excluded any unknown or future children from inheriting. The clause meant that if anyone came forward later claiming to be his biological child, they would automatically be denied any part of the estate. And not long after his death, someone did. A woman filed a lawsuit claiming her son was McQueen's child from a brief relationship during the 1960 SS. She provided documents and statements suggesting a connection and asked for her son to receive a share of the estate. However, the court dismissed the case due to lack of conclusive proof, and the child was never legally recognized. While that case went public, there were other claims that remained behind closed doors. Ed Hookstraten, McQueen's longtime lawyer, later admitted that at least 2 additional paternity claims were raised privately. These cases were handled quietly and didn't reach the courts. No financial settlements were disclosed. But the very fact that they existed pointed to how carefully McQueen's legal team had structured the will. It was written to protect against challenges and to ensure the estate passed exactly as intended. Sorting out the ownership of McQueen's physical possessions became another legal obstacle. Many of his vehicles, motorcycles, and memorabilia weren't formally documented under his name, and some didn't have clear provenance. This created confusion during probate, especially when items started surfacing in private collections or auctions. The family, along with appraisers and legal experts, had to track down and verify what truly belonged to him. Some pieces were recovered after being sold or misplaced. Others were lost entirely. The verification process took years, but ultimately added millions to the estate's recognized value. Chad McQueen, Steve's son, eventually became the central figure in managing his father's legacy. With a background in acting and motorsport, Chad had both the experience and emotional connection to handle the job. He took charge of licensing decisions, worked with collectors, and oversaw partnerships that used his father's name, face, and story. In doing so, he also built his own net worth, now estimated at more than $45 million, 0 cents, much of which is tied to the continuing success of McQueen's posthumous brand. Terry McQueen, Steve's daughter, took a quieter path. She worked behind the scenes in Hollywood, becoming an executive at Universal Studios. She avoided the media spotlight and managed her share of the estate privately. Tragically, Terry passed away in 1998 following complications from a liver transplant. Before her death, she made arrangements for her daughter Molly McQueen to inherit her stake in the estate. Today, Molly plays a significant role in preserving and promoting the McQueen legacy. She's involved in licensing decisions, oversees brand partnerships, and consults on projects tied to her grandfather's image. Molly helps ensure that new ventures align with the tone and values associated with McQueen, from fashion campaigns to automotive collaborations. She is now considered one of the key custodians of his legacy, with direct access to royalties and intellectual property rights. Barbara Minty, who was not listed as a major financial beneficiary in the will, still found a role in the estate's broader story. In the years after McQueen's death, she worked to share his life from her perspective. She helped produce several documentaries about his career and published a book titled Steve McQueen, The Last Mile, which became a bestseller. These projects gave her a public platform and, over time, allowed her to earn a share of royalties tied to McQueen's image. Although her financial portion remains smaller than Chad's, her involvement in preserving his story is widely recognized. Neil Adams, McQueen's first wife and the mother of Chad and Terry, was completely excluded from the will. She received no money, no property, and no formal acknowledgement. In interviews and memoirs, she has spoken openly about feeling erased from history, despite her role in helping McQueen rise to fame. She claims she supported him during his early struggles, introduced him to key people in the industry, and helped him develop the tough, brooding image that made him famous. Her exclusion from the estate remains one of its most controversial aspects. Despite this, Neil never pursued legal action against the estate. There's another figure in the story, one who has remained mostly invisible, a man allegedly born from a brief relationship McQueen had while filming overseas in the late 1960 SCs. His mother claimed McQueen was the father and left behind letters and receipts that hinted at a connection. Although the claim was never acknowledged officially, the case resurfaced in 2023 when new documents were uncovered. These included correspondence, travel records, and other items that suggested a stronger link than previously believed. While no DNA test has been confirmed, the man's legal team is reportedly preparing to reopen the claim, citing the growing value of the estate as reason to pursue inheritance. Whether or not the case reaches court remains to be seen, but it adds yet another layer to the already complicated family story. Steve McQueen also left behind something increasingly valuable: his right of publicity. This legal concept refers to the posthumous control over a person's name, image, and likeness. Not all celebrities secure this right before death, but McQueen did. That decision proved vital. Today, licensing deals tied to his image earn more money than he made during his lifetime. From clothing and watches to cars and commercials, his image continues to generate income decades after his final film. The estate, with careful management, grew rapidly. Key moments, like the 2006 discovery of a hidden collection in a New Mexico barn, boosted its value and changed public understanding of what McQueen had really left behind. Items recovered from the barn, including original scripts, race gear, and motorcycles, became museum-quality pieces. Sales of these items added millions to the estate and helped further build the brand. Legal disputes also followed the estate for years. Some involved royalties from films such as Bullitt and The Great Escape, while others revolved around memorabilia that had been loaned and not returned. Quiet legal battles helped the estate recover items and prevent unauthorized use of McQueen's name or likeness. Each successful claim strengthened the value of the brand. Interestingly, McQueen had planned to open a museum showcasing his collection. He had begun organizing pieces for display, but the idea never reached completion. Still, parts of his collection have been featured in traveling exhibits around the world, attracting attention and driving licensing revenue. Even in death, McQueen continues to shape industries: film, fashion, motorsport, and branding. Steve McQueen didn't just leave behind a will, he left behind a blueprint, one that turned his life into a long-term enterprise. The fortune he left was never loud, never obvious, and never simple, but it was strategic. And as time goes on, it continues to grow, evolve, and reveal new pieces of the legacy he built, often in silence. After Steve McQueen passed away in 1980, many assumed that his influence would gradually fade. Hollywood had already started to move on, new stars were rising, styles were changing, and McQueen's rugged, silent charisma seemed like something from a different time. But quietly, something else was happening. As the world adjusted to life without the King of Cool, his name was becoming more valuable than ever, not through new performances, but through something entirely different: licensing. In the decades following his death, Steve McQueen's image started to appear everywhere. Not in films, but in advertisements, fashion campaigns, and special product launches. His face, his style, and even the vehicles he drove became part of commercial strategies across industries. What began as a few nostalgic nods to a movie legend turned into a full-scale business, one that still generates millions each year. The initial wave of licensing began in the 1990s. Vintage icons were back in fashion, and McQueen's image was a perfect fit. He wasn't just known for his acting, he had become a symbol of coolness, independence, and understated rebellion. Those qualities gave brands something to sell, not just to fans of old films, but to new generations looking for authenticity in the products they bought. One of the most notable early examples came from the British clothing company Barbour. A single photo of McQueen wearing one of their jackets was used in a campaign that ultimately became one of the most successful in the company's history. That single image helped generate around $40 million in sales. It turned McQueen into more than a film star. He became a lifestyle symbol. The campaign didn't just work because of nostalgia, it worked because it represented something timeless. Grit, confidence, and style without effort. Shortly after, the Swiss watch brand Tag Heuer re-released the Monaco, a timepiece McQueen famously wore in the film Le Mans. They built an entire campaign around a photo of him behind the wheel, the square-faced watch clearly visible on his wrist. The relaunch revived interest in a model that had been nearly forgotten and helped push the brand's sales to new heights. McQueen again wasn't promoting it in the traditional sense. He wasn't alive, but his association with the watch gave it weight. It gave it meaning. Ford was another company that found lasting value in McQueen's legacy. The Bullitt Mustang, featured in one of his most iconic chase scenes, became a recurring piece of their marketing strategy. Ford revived the model multiple times, each time linking it directly to McQueen's image. Limited edition releases, commercials, and print ads made clear references to his role in Bullitt. Buyers weren't just purchasing a car, they were buying into a piece of cinematic and cultural history. That sense of connection helped drive up the price and desirability of each release. Behind the scenes, the estate was managing these deals with intention. They weren't licensing his image to just any company. Each agreement was carefully selected based on whether the brand fit the tone of McQueen's legacy. Products needed to feel authentic. That meant classic styling, high quality, and a certain masculine edge. By keeping the scope narrow and strategic, the estate ensured that his image retained value. Scarcity, in this case, became part of to handle the legal and administrative side of things. Greenlight managed trademarks, negotiated contracts, and ensured product approvals stayed within agreed boundaries. This helped transform McQueen's image into something more than a nostalgic brand. It became a controlled business operation, one that grew consistently year after year. Forbes eventually started tracking McQueen's posthumous earnings. By the early 2010s, he had become one of the top-earning deceased celebrities. Licensing income surged, with brand partnerships in fashion, watches, vehicles, and other lifestyle sectors. His likeness became valuable intellectual property, and the estate was positioned to capitalize on it across multiple markets. Chad McQueen, Steve's son, played a key role in protecting and managing this growth. He monitored the use of his father's image, helped block counterfeit products, and approved licensing projects that aligned with the legacy. In doing so, he built a career that revolved around maintaining and growing what his father had left behind. These decisions weren't just about money. They were about long-term value, ensuring that McQueen's image wouldn't be overused or diluted. In 2017, Porsche collaborated with the McQueen estate to launch a Le Mans tribute line. Special edition cars, branded merchandise, and digital campaigns were released globally. Again, McQueen's face appeared in ads, this time decades after the original film had premiered. The event drew massive attention from collectors and fans, showing that his influence was far from fading. In fact, it was growing in value. Interestingly, McQueen's appeal wasn't limited to the United States. In Japan and parts of Europe, his image became central to marketing strategies for high-end in denim, motorbike gear, and even cologne. Licensing agents noted that his face didn't feel too American, a trait that made him relatable in international markets. His silence, his expression, and his style crossed cultural barriers easily. It gave him longevity other icons didn't have. One key reason the brand has continued to thrive is the estate's strict approach to licensing. Unlike some celebrity estates that saturate the market, the McQueen team has been highly selective. They've said no to more offers than they've accepted. This has created a sense of exclusivity. When McQueen's name is attached to a product, it stands out. That scarcity adds to its value. It also builds trust with consumers who come to expect a certain quality when they see his face or name used in a campaign. Today, licensing revenue tied to Steve McQueen ranges from tens of millions to over $100 million annually, depending on how active the campaigns are. Even in slower years, the brand performs consistently. And unlike acting careers, licensing income doesn't require new performances. The existing archive of photos, footage, and recordings continues to generate value. Over the years, McQueen's estate has expanded its reach. From fashion lines and watches to coffee table books, restored film reels, and pop-up exhibits, the McQueen brand has become multidimensional. New generations are discovering his films through streaming platforms, often accompanied by behind-the-scenes content or curated collections. These are carefully packaged not just to tell stories, but to sell the legend. One of the biggest takeaways from all this is simple. Steve McQueen has made more money since his death than he did while he was alive. That's not due to unmade films or hidden royalties. It's because his legacy was transformed into a brand that still speaks to people today without needing a single new word from him. But this commercial success has also created deep divides behind closed doors. The heirs to McQueen's fortune haven't always agreed on how things should be run. While Chad and Molly McQueen continue to play active roles, others connected to his past, like his ex-wives, have at times felt excluded or overlooked. Quiet legal disputes have arisen over specific items, usage rights, and the way his story is presented to the public. Barbara Minty, for example, was later brought into royalty arrangements after the licensing boom began, though her share remains smaller. Neil Adams, his first wife and mother of his children, was never included financially. She's voiced her disappointment in interviews, but has avoided legal action. These differing roles highlight how complex managing a legacy like McQueen's can be. It's not just about money. It's about who gets to define a man's story after he's gone. A lingering mystery also hangs over the estate. Rumours suggest that a final sealed storage vault belonging to McQueen still exists, unopened. Insiders say it may contain handwritten letters to fellow actor James Dean, an unfinished script for a prison escape film, and even an audio tape recorded shortly before McQueen died. If true, the contents could change the public understanding of who he was. They could also further increase the estate's value. Whether or not the vault is ever opened, one thing remains clear. Steve McQueen's legacy is still evolving. His name, face, and style continue to inspire people, drive campaigns, and build wealth. But it's not happening by accident. It's the result of careful planning, strategic decisions, and a brand built on more than just fame. It's built on a life that was lived authentically, and that kind of legacy never goes out of style.